Hej, Ivar Arpi här. Från och med nu är jag en del av Kvartal. Kul va? Det tycker jag i alla fall. Kanske lite oväntat, eller inte alls oväntat. Jag vet inte. Men nu är jag här i alla fall och jag har tagit med mig mina 2 poddar. För dig som följer Kvartal innebär det att du nu får ytterligare 2 poddavsnitt varje vecka. I podden Rak höger med Ivar Arpi så intervjuar jag framträdande politiker, akademiker eller författare. Eller bara människor som är intressanta på något sätt. Och i podden Under kritik som jag har ihop med Anna-Karin Windham så slår vi både näven och handväskan i bordet om aktuella och rykande inaktuella händelser. Och båda poddarna utkommer som sagt en gång i veckan. För dig som ännu inte har blivit prenumerant antingen på Kvartal eller på min Substack Rak höger så betyder det här att du nu kan få all min journalistik och hela resten av Kvartal med en enda prenumeration. Och just nu så får du första månaden helt gratis om du går till kvartal.se/testa Ivar. Gör det, tycker jag. Testa Ivar. För då kan du lyssna på hela avsnitten av mina 2 poddar, helt reklamfritt dessutom. Och så får du hela Kvartals växande utbud på köpet, inklusive alla poddar i fullversioner och utan reklam, som du kan höra direkt i Kvartals app eller i exempelvis Podcaster eller Spotify. Eller där du väljer att lyssna på din podd. Så gå till kvartal.se/testa Ivar för att testa det nya och växande Kvartal helt gratis första månaden. Tänk själv, som de säger här på Kvartal. Men gör som jag säger och testa Ivar. Today I'm speaking with Simon Critchley, who's a philosopher and author of Tragedy, The Greeks and Us, a book that came out in 2019. And in that book, he argues that tragedy offers a truer philosophy than philosophy itself, a way of thinking that begins where certainty ends. We talk about what happens when justice stands on both sides, when virtue and flaw are inseparable, and when insight comes too late for action. For Simon Critchley, tragedy embodies a philosophy opposed to Plato's. Instead of banishing contradiction to protect reason, it lets conflict and emotion become forms of knowledge. I think this is a foundational insight. Life is full of trade-offs, and we're better off when we face them head-on. Virtues can easily turn into vices when circumstances change. And our freedom is always circumscribed by fate, even though we often give fate different names nowadays. Anyway, while we're at it, I should mention the title of his latest and fantastic book, I Want to Die, I Hate My Life, that came out this year. It do be like that sometimes. And the book is excellent, by the way, so if you ever wanted to study literature or philosophy at university but didn't, or if you did and came away disappointed like I did, Simon Critchley's books are the best gateway drug I've come across in a long, long time. In this episode, Simon Critchley shows how tragedy, theater, and democracy are linked, what it means to live without rescue and to think clearly in the dark. But now on to today's guest. You're listening to Rak höger with me, Ivar Arpi. Welcome, Simon Critchley, to Rak höger.
Thank you very much, Ivar.
We scheduled to do this podcast before, but one of my daughters fell and broke her front teeth, so I had to rush to the hospital. And as I said before we started recording, she hasn't learned anything. She keeps bumping the hurt teeth, so. But I can't really be angry at her because she has my genes, so the learning curve is very flat when it comes to life. And but speaking of tragedy, I came across your book Tragedy, The Greeks and Us a while ago, and it
it really like struck a nerve, or how do you say, like it really felt like reading something that's like sometimes you feel like, oh, I've already thought this, but it's in actuality it's like somebody is actually thinking something that you just like had the tip of the iceberg, and somebody's talking about the whole iceberg and really describing it in detail. And that was like a little bit my feeling when I read your book, because
Well, that's great.
I think I've had the vanilla version of tragedy. So today we're going to try to get a little bit more serious, I think.
Right.
Because I read philosophy at the university at pretty low level, but then you come across sort of the versions of tragedy. But I just wanted to begin to ask you, because why is somebody on a podcast speaking about Greek tragedy 2,400 odd years or something after they were... what is it about tragedy, especially Greek tragedy perhaps, and Shakespearean tragedy, that keeps us engaged and we keep going back to it?
It's legible to us. It's legible to how we think about things and what we feel. Maybe more importantly, what we feel. In a way in which, I don't know, say the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is older and for some people more important, but it doesn't speak to us in the same way. You can read the Epic of Gilgamesh and you can know it, be entertained by it, but it doesn't kind of burn into the core of who you are. And maybe that's even true of Homer. I've read Homer and very interesting, but it doesn't really kind of excoriate me. It doesn't really hit me in that deep way, and the Greek tragedies do, and Shakespearean tragedy does. And why is that? It's hard to say. It's as if something was stumbled upon in the form of drama that in a way hasn't changed very much. If these plays didn't speak to us, they weren't legible to us, then they'd be interesting historical artifacts, but they wouldn't be, of deep kind of existential importance. So that's what I'd say. And why do they speak to us? Well, that's a really difficult question to answer, because all we have are kind of we have the greatest hits and we have a library mistake. So the greatest hits was some kind of compilation of the plays of Aeschylus and Sophocles that were the most popular. So it was a kind of a club mix, like a Christmas club mix of Greek tragedy. And here are the hits. Yeah. And those are the ones that we have by Aeschylus and Sophocles, and a couple of the plays by Euripides, like Medea. And the rest are just somehow a number of plays turned up that were categorized under the names, Iota and Kappa and Mu and Nu, and we have those too. So we have this 31 plays, 16 of which are by Euripides. So Euripides is kind of the most represented of the three Greek ancient tragedians, and the one that, for me, in many ways, is the most disturbing and the most powerful.
When you sort of like you have to defamiliarize yourself a little bit when you read about these tragedies, or you read them, because you feel so... I mean, I've just read Percy Jackson and the Olympians to my kids, and I mean, it's a nice, entertaining way to sort of enter the Greek mythos and mythology, but it also sort of makes you feel like you have the world under control. You know these gods and you know these characters, like but when what your book brings out is that there's, as you said also, that it's more disturbing. And I wanted to get at it from an angle that you bring out in the book, which is that our view, and maybe then my view, of the Greek tragedies are sort of in the versions of philosophers. First Plato and Aristotle with their differing views, and then later philosophers, and they've all sort of have their way of putting tragedy in a certain box or in a certain, like, could you just, like, why is Plato why is he warning against tragedy and
Right. I mean, it's. A lot of the book, Tragedy of the Greeks and Us, is directed against Plato, with whom I have a kind of a love-hate relationship. But this discourse that he invents, which he calls philosophia, philosophy, is constituted against drama in general and tragedy specifically. And there are numerous things that objections that Socrates raises against tragedy. It excites the emotions too much. It excites the feelings of grief. There's too much lamentation, too much suffering. And this is not good for the balance of the soul, and by implication for the balance of the city. And a similar argument is made about comedy, in a sense that if we laugh too much, if we laugh too heartily, then this is also politically dangerous. So to understand what Plato's up to, we have to put Plato in the context of an anti-democratic line of thinking. Greek tragedy between, let's say, 472, which is the date that we think is that of Aeschylus's Persians, until Oedipus at Colonus and some of the late plays by Euripides, which is right at the end of that century, so 404, 3. So we're talking about a 70-year period. And that was also the period of democracy, where the Athenians had this brilliant idea to this new idea to base a city on the idea of equality, isonomia. It's not equality in the modern liberal sense, but it's a strong form of equality. And so there's a correlation between drama and democracy, at least in the mind of Plato. And he thinks that democracy is a lovely expression. He talks about it as the fairest and most multicolored of political forms. It's as if democracy is like a Benetton advert from the 1980s, or maybe a campaign by who's the big high street, like an H&M campaign from the 90s. It's a kind of and here all these people, it's this many-colored wonderful thing, all wearing these clothes, and it's and it looks great, but what it does is it allows this character to appear who's called the tyrant, and the tyrant wins over the public because he offers to give the public what they want. So the tyrant is a populist, gets elected democratically, and then proceeds to destroy the institutions of democracy and institute a tyranny. So for Plato, democracy leads to tyranny, and tragedy is the kind of the apologia. It's the it's the art form which kind of encourages tyranny. It allows the tyrant it allows those feelings to find voice. So extreme feelings, the prospect of tyranny, and Plato's argument is that has to be shut down, and that has to be literally shut down. The poets and the tragedians will be asked to leave the city, and the beautiful city that's run by philosophers. We can come back to that, and all that we can accept in the legitimate city, in the just polis, the just city, are hymns of praise to the great men and songs in praise of the gods, more or less. And the strange thing about saying those words, while sitting here in New York, is that this is kind of exactly what's been happening over the last, in different ways, on the left and on the right, in the last years, and so there's a whole issue there about the way democracy leads to tyranny. So maybe Plato was right to be so suspicious. So there's that. But so what Plato does, brilliantly, compellingly, particularly in dialogues like the Phaedrus and Symposium, is to construct a counter discourse to tragedy, a counter discourse, and to do it in a dialogical form, in a dramatic form. So Plato responds to drama with a new type of drama, the Socratic dialogue. And then if we fast forward a bit to the end of the 4th century BC, to our friend Aristotle, who by this point was the most, powerful intellectual / scientist in the world. He'd swept into power with the Macedonian takeover of Greece. Alexander the Great was his pupil, so he winds up in Athens with this huge research facility that he calls the Lyceum, and they're doing all sorts of work. They're like Doge or Palantir or something. They're sorting the world out. But one thing that he does is there were these lectures on drama, which are called the Poetics, and these it's about 10,000 words. It's really, really tiny, and we just have the first book and not the second book. The first book is on tragedy. The second book was meant to be on comedy. It's been lost. There's a whole debate. Well, did the second book of the Poetics actually exist, and what might it have looked like? I go into a lot of speculation on that in the book. It's fascinating. But Aristotle, it's fair to say, on the one hand, reads a lot of plays. On the other hand, he domesticates tragedy. He makes it safe for us. And it's really through Aristotle's spectacles that we've seen tragedy.
Because then you go into the later philosophers, and you have maybe the most famous to modern readers or listeners here is the Nietzsche's book, The Birth of Tragedy, which is a classic. And then you sort of have the tragedy of philosophy. You contrapose that to the philosophy of tragedy, and that they're not exactly the same. So you have the Aristotle, like the sanitized, domesticated version, and also how the later, especially the German philosophers, maybe wants to like put tragedy in a certain sort of box and maybe idealize it in other ways. So domesticate, but maybe like also make it sort of divine, almost semi-divine, and it's a shame we can't do stuff like that anymore. But you have another take on it, which I maybe you could go into. What is if you turn it around, what is the philosophy of tragedy, and how does it differ from these versions of tragedy that these philosophers have?
So there's kind of, I'm trying to read tragedies against philosophy, and tragedies against what we can call the philosophy of the tragic. And I give an abbreviated account of that in the Tragedy of the Greeks and Us book, because the longer version was cut out by my much missed and much loved editor, Dan Frank. He said, look, you can't just have this long discussion of Schelling and Hegel. This really, this should be a book on the Greeks. So you've got to leave this stuff out. So that then came out in this book, I Want to Die, I Hate My Life, which is one of my favorites.
Great title.
Great title. I mean, I'm all about the great title. I love a great title. And so the philosophy of the tragic really is, there's a specific set of arguments which it would be kind of too tedious to go into in this context, but which they can read about if they wish. And it's really that after Kant, art, the domain of art, becomes that domain where the reconciliation of nature and freedom, of pure and practical reason, are going to be unified. Art becomes that domain. And that's an argument that Kant sort of made in the Critique of Judgment, but which is very much picked up by the early German romantics and German philosophers of the 1790s and early 19th century. And it's a powerful position, but it's usually based on the reading of one play or of two plays. In Schelling, it's really a reading of Oedipus the King, and or in Hegel, it's the Antigone, and that's kind of my point, is that there are these 31 plays. You can't make generalizations about the tragic based upon such a limited evidence base. So read the plays and then see if these plays fit into Aristotle's boxes, which is, there's a recognition and reversal, and this leads to catharsis. Okay, good luck with that when you're reading Euripides. That doesn't seem to work. And does this idea, this elevation of the tragic, so the elevation of art in the 19th century, the elevation of the tragic as the highest form of art, which you can see then finds its form in, say, the music, in the opera of Wagner. And there's the young Nietzsche trying to impress his older friend Richard, and he writes this, what I think is a terrible book, The Birth of Tragedy. I'm very fond of Nietzsche, but The Birth of Tragedy is without doubt his worst book. And as proof of that, that's exactly what Nietzsche says about it. Nietzsche says this is an awful book. It was it was a youthful book. I'm sucking up to Richard Wagner, and basically it's an artist's metaphysics born from some naivety. And so Nietzsche himself realizes the problem that he's got now. And then, but still, this innovation of the Apollinian and the Dionysian that Nietzsche stumbles upon in order to explain tragedy just has legs. I mean, and I've tried this over the years. I haven't taught tragedy for actually many years, certainly since about 2017. And you can say what I've just said about Nietzsche, and people will still go, "Oh well, the Dionysian, man, the Dionysian's this thing," and I say, well, no, there's no. Dionysus is not a figure in tragedy. He appears in one play called the Bacchae, and there's no drive called the Dionysian, like there's no drive called the Apollinian. So just forget about all that and read the plays and see what conclusions you come to. So I'm trying to kind of batter to attack that idea of the philosophy of the tragic and its lofty pretentiousness and its and its Germanism, and to take us back to the sheer turbulence and difficulty of the plays themselves, and how they speak to us. So to lose as much as possible all of those philosophical frames, and to go back to the plays.
It's very hard to pinpoint exactly what I'm trying to say, but the chaos of the original plays is sort of alien to somebody who's trying to find the overarching principle or first principle or the truth. So you want to I understand why you want to just base it on one play or maybe two plays, because then you can cut out the chaos, and then you can say it's really about this. And another thing I find when I read your book, and so I realize that you put into words something that really annoys me, is when you try to deduce. You said the word catharsis, for example, and that's a word I've thrown it around a lot, and I realized when I read your book, I've been using this word a lot, and then you realize I don't really know. Maybe I don't really know what I mean with it, by it. And what you want is a story should give you sort of a teachable moment, or so what do we learn about after we've watched or
nothing.
What do we learn? What do we take with us then, so that we can bring back from the mountain to the people?
I don't care. I mean, nothing really. Nothing. I mean, really.
But don't you think people get very provoked when you say that?
Good. I mean, screw them. I mean, it's no, the idea that we learn that this is about education, moral education, and we need these plays in order to become better people, is ludicrous. There's no evidence for that historically, philologically, no evidence for that the audience to Greek tragedy was somehow these people that needed moral instruction from drama. They didn't. They were educated Athenians. They were pretty smart, and they were just looking at plays. And what did it show them? We don't know. There were no reviews. There were no online reviews. There was no tweet or X's about the plays. But the idea that we can only justify them through what they teach us, I think is laughable. For me, it's more like, how would I put it? There's a great Coen Brothers film, Burn After Reading. And in Burn After Reading, things happen. You get Brad Pitt as a gym instructor, George Clooney as a CIA operative, it's a great film. Things happen. And then at a certain point in the film, the FBI are observing what's happened in this case and who's died and why they've died. And the last scene of the film is two FBI guys, and they're sitting in the office. So what do we? So this happened, and this person died, and then that happened. What did we learn from this? And they said, well, got no idea what. And then the movie ends, and that's an extreme way of making the point that art is not moral tutorial. Art is not moral tutorial, and drama is not moral tutorial. And drama, whether it's Sophocles, whether it's Shakespeare, is not like Guinness. It's not good for us. It's the opposite. In many ways, it's a glimpse of horror, of entanglement, of being stuck with who you are, those types of things, and we're able to see those things play out, and if the drama is good and we like it, we can feel ourselves held by that drama. But it's the actors. I mean, what are actors for? Actors exist in order to go down to those places in order that we don't have to go down to those places. We can just watch and sit there in the light, as it was with the Greeks, or in the dark, as it's usually the case with us. And what do we take away from that? We take away from what we take away from that what we take away. But the idea that there's some higher moral purpose here is ludicrous. And catharsis is fascinating because when I was starting to really think about this, I had the good fortune of teaching a class at a different university, which was full of these proper classicists, and I learned a lot. They knew a lot more than I did, and one of them just did a series of word searches on the use of catharsis in antiquity and in Aristotle in particular. And there's something like 72 uses of the word catharsis in Aristotle. There may be not that many, maybe like 40 or 50. But they all refer to things like menstruation. They refer to the way in which a woman's period, that loosening of that loosening that happens, that which is a cleansing, right? Which is a cleansing. That's a catharsis, or it could even refer to like going to the toilet as a catharsis. Catharsis is a kind of expulsion of something that actually can make you feel better, and the idea that it's linked to education, the idea that it's linked to some ritual purification, is there's no evidence for that, and there's no reason why we should think about art and in general and drama in particular in those terms. And people are very attracted to that, the idea that this is a ritual purification.
Now, since I have kids, I read a lot to my kids. Mm-hmm. And then it's something that people who are studied at university and fancy themselves as being sort of quasi-intellectual, and we are like educated. We're the educated. I'm part of the shattering class, the laptop class, and we read to our kids. It's very important that you read to your kids. And then,
yes, it is.
But the reason is also, I think that's good because then they will have. I think it's good because then. And then they will learn, and then they will have, and then they will be. And I always say, like, no, I want to share these stories with them. Like, I don't care. I don't think that they are like going to become sort of these paragons of virtue. But I do want to share stories with them and references and the culture that I have. So you won't. But that is, people often get sort of a little bit annoyed with me when I say that, because then you take away the reasons, sort of exactly as you said. Like you read these plays or you watch these plays, and then you become sort of a stronger, better, more intelligent person. And to just have the other, like, it's something that is enjoyable. And it's eye-opening, but maybe you can't quantify it. But that's sort of then people say, oh, well, then to hell with it then.
Well, I mean, but then it's I teach. In fact, in the spring, I was teaching. I've done this twice before, which is a class on Shakespeare's Hamlet, and all that we do in the play. This is for undergraduates, is that we begin, I buy them copies of Hamlet, cost about $8, decent edition, and I put them in the students' hands. I said, here's the book. We're going to read this in this edition this semester. The only thing I ask of you is to bring this book to class. And usually they do. They like being given something, and so I give them it, and it doesn't cost that much money. And you read a play like Hamlet. Now, Hamlet has been interpreted in 100,000 different ways, and all of those interpretations, like all of the movie adaptations of Hamlet, have some truth or some force, or there is some point to them. For example, what's fascinating is watching you have the famous Laurence Olivier version of Hamlet from after the Second World War, which begins with this line. It begins with this line, which is not in the play. The line is, "This is a story of a man who could not make up his mind." So there's your interpretation of Hamlet. He's someone that couldn't make up his mind. And that basically goes back to Goethe's interpretation. But the advisor on that movie was Ernest Jones, who was Sigmund Freud's biographer and close collaborator. So this was your psychoanalytic version of Hamlet, hugely popular. And then you get a version, there's a 1964 version of Hamlet by a Russian director, Soviet director called Kozintsev. And this is the Soviet version of Hamlet. And what Kozintsev did was to do a deliberately anti Olivier version, so that in the Kozintsev version, none of the actors are ever alone. They're always in a court situation. There's always other people around, as indeed there would have been in Helsinki, in Elsinore. And what the Russian version does incredibly powerfully is to bring out the political paranoia of the situation, which is obviously, in that context, it was the after effects of Stalin's terror, and that was being reflected. So they got two different interpretations, completely opposite. And there's a force to both of them. But you read the play, and it's as if 20 other things are happening, and it's so that there's something for me just liberating about reading an entire play like Shakespeare's Hamlet, which is something that we think we know, and then you read it and discover that actually, Hamlet ends with a Norwegian invasion of Denmark. That's what happens. And maybe Horatio, who's apparently Hamlet's great friend, who is given the task of telling Hamlet's story, "Please tell my story," Hamlet says his dying words. Maybe Horatio is in league with those Norwegians who come in and smash Denmark.
Yeah.
It's a political drama. And so there's something, I think, just incredibly liberating and powerful about that. And so, I mean, my view of tragedy is that tragedy is a tragedy of negativity and turbulence and confusion, if you like. And there's nothing redemptive, nothing cathartic about it. But when we are watching it, when we're reading it, we can imagine a kind of metamorphosis of ourselves. We can imagine we are, in a sense, somebody else, or maybe many other people in that drama. And there is a kind of freedom in that. There's something liberating in that for me. And
there's also if you think about tragedy or tragedies, there's often, or most of the time, there's the role of fate or prophecy, and you have Oedipus, who is prophesied to kill his father. In our modern circumstances, it's a sort of, we have this almost, at least especially perhaps in the United States, but in the whole Western world, this cult of being the architects of our own destiny, like that we have a free will. It's very important that we have a free will. And then you hear all these talks, these prophecies, and about this fate, and it sort of seems alien to us and also deterministic. But what you argue in the book is that it's perhaps these gods or divinities that you read about in these tragedies is maybe we could rephrase them in another way for like what are they really talking about, and also what first seems maybe as it's only fate and deterministic. It's more than that.
Yes.
Could you go into like what that means?
Yeah, let me give it a go. The usual way of thinking about fate is that fate is what we have no power over. Fate. Fate is in the background, and it will have its way. It's deterministic. It determines our actions. I take a different view that fate is something that we bring down on ourselves through actions where we're acting, but we're also acted through by forces that constitute us. Best example of that, the simplest example of that is Oedipus. Oedipus is told by the oracle that he's going to kill his father and copulate with his mother. And on the way back, on the road back from the oracle, going to, it's not clear where, he can't really go back to Corinth because he doesn't want to kill his father and mother, but he doesn't really know who they are. He's uncertain about who his father and mother are, and he's been told this prophecy. So he's wandering along the road, and along comes this older man with in a chariot with, let's say, 4 guards, and then an example of ancient road rage ensues. There's a dispute. You get out of the way. You get out of the way, and then Oedipus then kills the guards and then kills the old man. Now, and it turns out that old man is his father. Given that he didn't know really who his father was, and he'd been told he was going to kill his father by the oracle just a few hours before, you would imagine that he would exercise caution,
abstain from killing someone
maybe for a day or
while.
Two. Don't kill an older man for a while. Give it a week or two before you start killing. No, he kills that. So, and at that point, and what's interesting about that, and what I emphasize, is the way in which Oedipus raises the hand to strike. And he strikes at the guards, he strikes at his father. And what's involved in that raising of the hand to strike is the past acting through us. And
Nu är vår Leo Jackpot uppe i 480 miljoner kronor. På Leo Vegas. Ladda ner vår app och spela de mest populära spelen som Pirates 4, Lightning Roulette och Starburst. Välkommen till Leo Vegas, Sveriges mobilkasino. Åldersgräns 18 år. Regler och villkor på leovegas.se.
Trippelt välkommen tillbaka säger vi till cheeseburgarnas cheeseburgare. Ja, vi pratar såklart om triple cheese på McDonald's. Lika god som vår cheeseburgare, fast trippelt. Bara på McDonald's.
Tänk om din plånbok kunde prata. Vad skulle den då säga om din relation till ekonomi?
Alla relationer har ju sina ups and downs. Men att han har lån lite här och där, det tror jag skulle vara en ick för rätt många plånböcker och inte bara för mig.
Ett första steg mot en bättre relation till sin plånbok kan vara att samla sina lån.
Samla dina lån till ett på lendo.se.
in that action that we bring fate down and we fulfill the prophecy that's been made about us. So fate is something that we conspire with in order to bring that down. And another, there are countless different ways of thinking about this, but it gets away from the idea that we're masters of our destiny. We are the outcomes of we're all the outcomes of prophecies and familial destinies which play out in whichever way they play out. And in the I Want to Die, I Hate My Life book, I do that in relationship to Ibsen. So even, good old, 19th century Norwegians living in the west of Norway were having the same thing was happening to them. That the past was acting through them. So, Mrs. Alving in Ghosts can feel the past, which is the past of her husband, her dead husband, acting through the son and leading to a catastrophic outcome. And I think it's that way in which in drama, fate passes through us, and tragedy. This is the important consequence to this. This is the important consequence to this argument for me, is that tragedy is not something that happens independently of us, something that just befalls us. Tragedy is something that we actively bring down upon ourselves. Yeah. So when we say of an event, that was a tragedy, like there's a school shooting in Wisconsin, or another school shooting somewhere else, it's a tragedy. And our prayers and thoughts are with the victims of this awful tragedy. That, you have to understand that as it's a tragedy in the sense in which this is something that this society has brought down on itself. Right? Yeah. It brings down on itself, and every society does that. And so, and this gets us away from the idea that we are in any way sovereign, autonomous, free individuals in in the world. We're not. We are the outcomes of patterns of inheritance and generational structures, and we all live our prophecies in our ways. So we're all in the same boat as Oedipus or Antigone or whoever it might be. And that's why to go back to your first question, that's why the plays still speak to us, because it's the inseparability in Greek tragedy, and this is also true of Shakespeare, the inseparability between the private, the familial, and the public and the political. Those two things are just entangled, and that's important to remember, because we think that we think that we're somehow free of that, and yet we find ourselves in societies which are largely governed by familial structures.
And I also think that when we talk about these plays, it can be Shakespeare, but to a larger degree, even more so with the Greek tragedies. Like we have these gods or divinities, or you have these supernatural forces like a ghost or something, and then we maybe some people feel like, oh, we are so much more rational or better now. We wouldn't be ruled by divinities that we know, deities that we know don't exist. We're not superstitious like that. And then you go and then you see someone, a close friend, do something, for example, cheat on his wife and leave his kids and start a new marriage. And you say, what happened? No, he fell in love. He fell out of love, and then he fell in love. What do you mean fell, and what do you mean love? I mean, exactly. and it's sort of, and we accept lots of those explanations, like, oh, that's super intelligible. But having somebody talk about Aphrodite or Ares, or maybe a ghost visiting them, for example, that's sort of inexplicable then. But maybe we're when I read these parts of your book, it felt like I felt more alien to myself, but closer to the ancients or the people living through history, and like you actually, it's felt like time travel a little bit, like maybe
that's great. I mean, I'd like people to experience time travel. I'm looking for something, which of course I can't find.
It's the closest thing. And you also had like another like when we participate in our own tragedy or our own downfall. just some of the, when you phrase it like that, some of the your best characteristics, some things that is a virtue in one context also like brings out the worst in you in another context. So if you take the sort of the classical hero's journey or a hero, then if he's strong and he's strong enough, then he can overcome the threat, or he can sort of win, and then in the end everything is great, perhaps. But if you take the tragic heroes, they are not really heroes, because the things, the characteristics that make them kill the dragon, to be very stereotypical, it's also the thing that will perhaps bring in the tragedy, invite the tragedy into their own life.
The tragic hero is a kind of pollution. The tragic hero is the problem. In the case of, say, Oedipus, he's tyrant because he solved the riddle of the Sphinx and saved the city, but he is the reason for the plague in the city, and the solution is to get rid of him. So the hero is very often the problem in these plays. And on the gods, it's very interesting, because if we go back to Aristotle and to our German friends, they will be very skeptical. What the best tragedy is Oedipus the king, or maybe the Antigone, but usually Oedipus the king. Why? Because there's no divine intervention. It works just perfectly in terms of the characters on the stage, and we don't need any deus ex machina. We don't need any gods appearing from the side of the stage and solving things. And so it's as if the way in which we rank tragedies is in terms of how little the gods have to do with them. And I think exactly the opposite. I think that why I love Euripides so much is that Euripides will continually use the mechanism. I mean, the word in Greek is great. It's mechane, which really means like a mechanical crane that was somehow behind the stage on which the gods would appear.
I never realized that it was actually from the stage of like staging tragedies, that Deus ex machina. Actually, it's an actual crane coming in with.
It's a crane with gods saying, and the gods will say, well, So there's, and it's comical in Euripides. You get a whole number of his plays, but a play like Orestes. And in many ways, the Trojan Women and a whole number of others. But let's just say with Orestes, you get a situation of drama which just reaches a kind of a deadlock, where everybody is at each other's throat. Everyone's going to be about to be killed. There's about to be war. It's a kind of a deadlock. It's like, Russia, Ukraine right now. And then the gods appear, and they say, well, you're going to marry the woman who's you've got the woman against whose throat you've got a knife. You're going to marry her. This other guy is going to become ruler. We'll divide up the kingdom in the following way, and then Helen will be transformed into a star, and she will guide mariners as they travel the seas. And you sort of think this is laughable, but that's the point. Euripides is showing the separation between the gods and us, and it's there's a wonderful. I'm going to just quote something because it's by this very good classicist called Mary Lefkowitz from her book Euripides and the Gods, and she says, she adapts the final lines of the Medea, Euripides' Medea, to make a point. So this is kind of partly Mary Lefkowitz and partly Euripides. Many are the forms of divinity. The gods bring many things to pass unexpectedly, and what people think will happen does not come to pass. but the gods find a means to bring about what we do not imagine. That is the outcome of action. The gods find a means to bring about what we do not imagine. That's the outcome of action. So something about the obvious implausibility of the Deus ex machina, that the tragedy cannot resolve itself. It needs this, and I see that mechanism as a kind of, it's like when Brecht was talking about the alienation effect, the Entfremdungs effect. That at that point when the gods appear, in a sense, the house lights go up and the audience see what they've been looking at, and they're called to attention to themselves, and it's a sobering moment. But if we don't, if we think, well, the gods, that's too much, that's too spooky, then I think you can find, replacements for the gods. I think it's the discussion of Ibsen in I Want to Die, I Hate My Life. I talk about in John Gabriel Bjorkman, his vision of his vision of trade, his vision of this world of trade and shipping and capital as a kind of godlike force, or power or money or whatever it might be. So we have our gods, is kind of my point.
Yeah. We do, and we have. I feel I felt less and less modern as the years go by, so to speak, in my own life. I maybe it has to do with having kids, and you lose control, and you also realize that you bring something into the world, and it's not of their choosing.
On that, I think it's more than that. I think you're right. It's not just that. It can be that. I mean, in a sense that having children is about, in a sense, being tied to the past and the future of the child, but you're tied to the past in this very different way. You're part of a line of inheritance. You are a prophecy that's playing out. But I think more powerfully, and this is one of the responses I got to the book years ago, was we are ancients. We are old. We've been sort of beaten over the head with the dogma of modernity for, I don't know, the last century, or in Sweden since the 1920s, 30s, the heavy industrialization, and this is what we're going to do, and on we go.
I think we could go back even further. I think it's Luther's and the Reformation.
Well,
I think
Luther.
the Entzauberung, the beginning of the bring out all the superstitions, and then we sort of got rid of a lot of other stuff as well. It's sort of the whole God thing, and then people feel alienated. Oh, but that's a whole different. That's a much bigger.
No, it's a good
discussion.
one though. I mean, Luther is the gateway drug. Luther is. The Protestant Reformation is the gateway drug to where we are now, no doubt about that. And Luther is for me, the most important figure in modern European history, without doubt. Although, maybe Calvin was more influential, but certainly in the Nordic countries, Luther, and I think in the US more Calvin. And that dismantling of institutional authority, the Catholic Church, and the dismantling of superstition and myth, and papal indulgences and pilgrimages and monasteries and all of that. What did that lead to? That led to societies that could just make money and do trade and go around the world fucking things up. And that's so. And Luther is. And the great thing about Luther is that he knows, he understands the Pandora's box that he's opened, and which is, I think we're in a very Lutheran moment. This is a point that I think other people have made, that, I mean, Luther does this, but how Luther does this is through a revolution in media, right, through print and the dissemination of pamphlets. So Luther constantly scribbling these pamphlets in 1518, and off they went. And this was these were tweets, these were social media posts, and what we're living through now is a second kind of media transformation. I don't want to use the word revolution, media transformation, which is through the digital.
I think revolution has too much agency for what is happening now. It's sort of more. I also think that I've read a lot of about the Nordic mythology, and there are similarities, of course, to some of the old sagas and their outlook on life. There are similarities to the ancient Greeks. I shouldn't push it too far and become a German philosopher myself to see put them in the same box, and this is the way to view them all. But there's been like a tendency when you view the Greek mythology and then the old Norse mythology is to sort of have this hierarchy, like, okay, so Zeus is the highest, he's up on highest, and Odin is highest, and then you have this hierarchy and you have these temples, and they are in relation. If you have Zeus, he has 100 in power level. Right. And Ares, he has 75, but Hephaestus is only on 49 actually. So if they meet in single combat, he needs to have help from. So, but that's a very monotheistic sort of view, which is like you organize from the highest principle, and then you have like the Father, and you have the Holy Trinity, and then you may have the saints, and then and then you can have argument as to how much what is the power level of the devil? Is he on par with God? No, he can't be on par with God, but he has to threaten the God in some ways. Yeah. But then you actually look at how people in the Nordic countries how they actually worshipped, and these gods, they overlap with their powers, and so you have the god of war, but you actually have many gods of war, and in the Greek mythology you have many gods of wisdom. And the chaos that brings out is, I think, and also if you combine that with your book and how to view that, is something we haven't touched so much on. It's like sometimes there are two right things, there are two opposing sides, and it's not that you have the devil and you have God. It's more like maybe you have two gods. And they are both right, and those gods can be stand-ins then perhaps for things within you, or values that you cherish, or goals that you or your group or your city or you want to accomplish. And the only thing you know when you see this is that you will fail, but how you choose to fail. That might you have some. I'm not sure if I'm making sense here, but
no, you are. No, it's for me. This is the tragedy is the experience of moral ambiguity. It's not that there is in tragedy there are always two things that are right, and those two claims are being contested, and that the drama is the contestation of those two claims. So, and often that will turn around the same word that in Aeschylus's Oresteia, that word is justice, dike. And does justice mean that a husband can be killed by his wife if that husband had murdered their daughter? Is that just? Or is it just for the son to avenge the murder of his father and to kill his mother? What is just in those cases? And they're both claims to justice. And justice in the dramas is divided. Same thing in the Antigone. It all turns around one word in Greek, which is nomos, which is of law or custom, or let's say a folk way. And is Antigone right in saying that in all circumstances one must bury the dead, and so she insists on burying her brother Polynices, although it leads to her own death by being walled up in a cave? Or is Crayon right in saying that, you know, traitors to the city should not be buried with honor? It's a conflict around the meaning of one term. So this is where the ancients are ahead of us. That tragedy is the form of articulation of moral ambiguity, and if there's something that we cannot tolerate, it's moral ambiguity. We just want things to be clear. Is this a good person or a bad person? Is this a good thing to do or a bad thing to do? And in all the plays, it's both at once. The comparison with Nordic myth is fascinating. I was just looking for a book that I read a couple of years ago, which really I learned a lot from, called Children of Ash and Elm by Neil Price.
Neil Price, he's a Brit, but he's also the pride of Sweden because he works here at Uppsala University, and it's a great book,
extraordinary book. And then
it does what your book for me and for many others brings out. You said both the German and the English word for it, so I'll say the Swedish word. Förfrämliga, like you sort of gets more strange, but it also brings you closer to the Greek works of tragedy. I think he does something a little bit similar to the Nordic sagas and mythology, because you grow up with it, you know all the stories, but then you read his book and it's like, oh, this is much more strange than I remember, and more interesting as well.
Yeah, and in particular, what was happening with with death practices, burial practices, particularly with the Swedish Vikings down in the the Knipa and down into what is now Ukraine and beyond. And I mean, it's so strange and brutal and violent and horrifying to us. And then those very same people become Christianized. What's involved in that? What kind of power grab is that? It's some kind of power grab. A shift from sea to land, all sorts of things like that. So there's but we're not. I guess the wider point I want to make is that we people like to divide history up into periods. Antiquity, late antiquity, dark ages, and so on and so forth. And then we can position ourselves at the end of that as moderns, or whatever term we like to use, contemporaries, and that's just wrong. We inherit all of that stuff. All that stuff is active and actually sort of psychoactive inside us, and we ignore that at our peril. If we think we're through with that, then we'll be destroyed by it, which is arguably, one way of thinking about what's happening in say the European Union at the moment. I think it's a real, for me, having left Britain 22 years ago, and I come back a lot, but the European context that I knew, and the Swedish context indeed that I knew, seems totally unrecognizable to me. What's going on now from that, and is that because we failed to understand where we were, that we were so self-assured, so confident of what we'd achieved and what we'd done and what was settled moral belief and political practice, and then we find that all of that upended and transformed, and we don't really have a way of responding to that. And,
I think you describe sort of maybe that's the middle part of a future lost tragedy. Like maybe you partake even when you're at your best. you feel like the most assured that you are in the right. You're maybe you're killing your father, so to speak.
Exactly.
And it's hard to know. It's hard to know. Sometimes the people who are beloved the most in their, like, when there are active politicians, they become the most hated because something that seemed minor at the time becomes the major thing later on, and then they go back and say, that was his fault. But during that time, the popularity was through the roof. Or maybe it's the other way around. Like you have a person like Margaret Thatcher, who was, she's still very not very liked. But maybe we will look back in like 50 years, or so to speak, and we will see if there's when the people who lived through it, then you maybe see it in another light, and it's very hard to know. It's very hard to know when you're up. You still have to partake in your own downfall, so to speak, in the tragedy.
Yeah.
And live through the moment.
How would you see that in the Swedish context? Because I remember, my first Swedish friends, I was studying in France and doing this French language class. I got money from the British government to begin a PhD, so I decided to flee to France and live there. I eventually came back, but I was taking the money and running. Anyway, that was the year Olof Palme died or was killed, executed. And I visited Sweden for the first time, I think it was 86, 87, and it was just, I thought, bewilderingly, wonderful and expensive. And then I've just watched it over the years and watched how certain things which, could not, should not be said or done, which clearly, Swedes had gone beyond, then come back in some alternate form. And there is a kind of hubris to that, which is.
Yeah. I mean, I'm
asking you a question now.
Yeah, I think if you live in a country and you partake in politics, you are. I think if you're going to do it, you have to accept that you might be. Even though you when you feel you're on the right side of history, for me that's like saying you have God on your side, and the only thing you know is that you have no idea which side God is on, and you have no idea how history will be written. It might be that you are, the sketch from Mitchell and Webb, where they are not Nazis in the, and like why do they put skulls on the caps? Like the Brits didn't get to design our uniforms. Are we the baddies? I mean, I think it's of course it's a joke on the Nazis, but I think it's a joke you should tell yourself all the time. Like, am I the baddie? Like, am I? Because of course you don't feel like it. And actually, I think one of the things that you bring out in the book is like the first preserved tragedy is one of the strangest things when you look at it again. It's the Persians, because it's 10 years after the Battle of Salamis, or even 8 years. And so, as you say in the book, it's like it's a play being performed by and for veterans of one of the most consequential battles in arguably at least Western Europe's history, or European history, world history. And it's a play completely told from the point of view of the Persians, and having the news of the Battle of Salamis reaches the court, and then Xerxes returns home, the generals return home, the ghost of Darius, and I was just thinking when I was reading that, like, how would this be possible? Like, could this feat of, if you would call it empathy, be performed today in Sweden or US? Like, it's like having a play, like the highest grossing movie in Hollywood, 2009, is a movie about Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and about the World Trade Center, told from their perspective. And we couldn't have done it. And then I feel like, okay, that's a challenge in this for us today, is like, can you empathize so much with your opponent or in a political sphere, or is it?
Yeah, that's very interesting stuff. I mean, I when I first got to New York in about 2004, the movie that everybody was watching was called The Fog of War. The Fog of War, which was a documentary by the great documentarian Errol Morris. And The Fog of War is a study of McNamara, who, for people on the left, was was Satan himself, because he administered the policy in Vietnam. And McNamara says the first rule of war is sympathy with the enemy. First rule of war is sympathy with the enemy, and that stuck with me, because that's right. And and you mentioned, so if there were a movie of Osama bin Laden or whatever, but the thing is that it was a movie in the sense in which the statement that Osama bin Laden used to issue these statements periodically. And there's one statement, I think it's from 2004, and it's the first statement where he indicates some implication in 9/11. And he says, why did we have this idea? Well, we had this idea, and the statement is called The Towers of Lebanon. And Osama bin Laden remembers being a child in Saudi Arabia in his luxurious household, and watching television. And on that television, there was the towers of the beach of Beirut. The playground of the Middle East, as it was, being bombarded by the U.S. Navy. And he saw missiles going into towers, and that visual memory then leads to the idea that, well, the way to respond to American aggression in the Middle East is by putting missiles into towers. The point being is that it's a reenactment, it's a repetition, and action is always divided. And this is something that happens in tragedy. It's not that there is one thing that happens which is tragic, but tragedy is a play of violence and counter-violence, always. And so, 9/11 is a wonderful example of that. If people here, or indeed in the West, had not been so illiterate and stupid and thought about history more intensely, then they'd realize that this 9/11 was a direct kind of visual response to American aggression and Israeli aggression in Lebanon, and therefore the tragedy, if it is a tragedy, 9/11, it's a tragedy that we brought down on ourselves. In that case, the Bush administration brought down on itself. And the extraordinary thing about Persians is, as you say, that the Battle of Salamis, which if that had failed, then we'd probably all be speaking some dialect of Farsi or whatever Farsi would have been. Then this naval victory is won. The Persians are not defeated, but they give up. The Greeks are just too difficult, and it's not that important anyway. So they lose interest. But that they would stage this play. Because this is another thing where reading the plays is so much more important than theories of the plays. That one thing that you can find in any number of sources, indeed in Aristotle and many others, is that tragedy deals with myth and not history. And the first tragedy we have deals with history.
Yeah.
So that explodes that idea. And not just history, but history told from the perspective of the enemy. Told from the perspective of the enemy in a way that when the ghost of Darius the Great appears and admonishes his son Xerxes, he also he admonishes him for desecrating the altars and the sacred places of the Greeks, and this is hubris. But he's also addressing, the ghost of Darius the Great is addressing the Athenians, saying that if the Athenians do what the Persians did, then they will come to the same end, which indeed is what they did. They learned nothing. Sadly, we learn nothing.
No, yeah. I want to die and I hate my life. That's maybe we learn nothing. And I mean, what have we learned today, Simon? I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot, and I hope the listeners have as well.
It's a cheerful, upbeat message. No, it's the. I mean, the bit that I'm. I mean, I wrote I Once Day I Hate My Life in a moment of, I think, real, for reasons that, we don't need to go into. I was pissed off, and I had this material, and I thought, and the thing that really got me, and I also wanted it to be a book that would almost not exist. It's another part of my fantasy structure. I mean, sometimes it's nice for books to get lots of attention, and I played that game. I also like it when books almost don't exist, and this one almost doesn't exist. And there's this great stuff about...
There was one. I found it in one bookstore in Sweden, in Stockholm, Hedengrens, which is a great bookstore.
Okay.
But only one copy, and so I was really happy to get the one copy that I found. I mean, there of course, there might have been other copies, but it's not as huge as Tragedy, the Greeks and Us, which was been in many podcasts, and I think it sold a lot.
Well, I mean, it's but it was deliberate. It was deliberate, and in the way in which, what I really became increasingly frustrated is an understatement with, was the idea that everything that one does as a human being and as someone that works in a university or does various things, everything that one does has to be accountable in moral and political terms, and everything is assessed in terms of a calculus of where you stand on certain issues. And the thing about tragedy is it doesn't stand anywhere. It stands in at least two places at once. Yeah. So I think the way in which we understand politics in terms of taking a stand, taking a position, is a fundamental misunderstanding of history, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what we should be doing at this point, that we should be looking at least at two positions at the same time, and maybe delaying from making any kind of universalistic moral and political statement, but just sit back and this for me is ultimately, I guess, why history is more important than philosophy. I mean, philosophy is, it's my day job, and I'm happy to teach it. I'm very lucky to teach it. But for me, it's history that really is the key thing. And the closer one looks at any situation, the more sides it has, and the more complex it becomes. And all that one can hope to do is to convey that complexity. And I think that oddly, one of the paradoxes of the present is that podcasts have become platforms for communicating some of that complexity in ways that books are no longer seem to work. But podcasts, there's that interests me too.
And I'm very thankful for you being part of Rak Höger today. Thank you, Simon Critchley.
Thank you very much indeed. Ivar. Thank you for having me, and hello to all my old friends in Sweden.
Och där tog det stopp. Ja, Ivar Arpi här igen. Om du vill höra resten av den här podden så måste du vara prenumerant på Kvartal, som jag nu har blivit en del av. Om du redan är prenumerant på min Substack rak höger så blir du nu automatiskt prenumerant på Kvartal och kan logga in i Kvartals app med din mailadress. Så kolla din mail för mer information. Men om du inte ännu är prenumerant på rak höger eller Kvartal så kan du testa att bli det i en månad helt gratis på kvartal.se/testa Ivar. Så för att testa mig, mina poddar, mina texter och resten av Kvartals texter och poddar gratis första månaden, gå till kvartal.se/testa Ivar så kan du börja med att höra resten av den här podden.